This is episode 98. Here we are, almost 100.
Together.
And we are together. We are in Pittsburgh. Dr. Pompa has joined us in the office, so it's very fun. I don't know, this is maybe the second time since we did a recording that we've actually been on the same screen sharing it. So it's fun to have you here and to be together to record. We have a very special guest for you today, Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. And before I introduce him, I'm going to read his bio, and then we're going to learn a little bit more about Dr. Dominic. If maybe is that what we call you, Dr. Dom? Dr. Dominic?
Dom is great, yeah.
Dom. Okay, well, we'll hear more about Dom's work and all the amazing things that he's doing in his lab. We're going to be talking about ketosis, about using exogenous ketones. We'll explain what those are if you don't know. And it's going to be an amazing episode. So let me get started here and tell you a little bit more about Dom. So Dr. Dominic D'Agostino is an assistant professor in the Department of Molecular Pharmacology and Physiology at the University of South Florida, Moransani College of Medicine, and also a senior research scientist at the Institute for Human and Machine Cognition. The primary focus of his laboratory is developing and testing metabolic therapies, including ketogenic diets, ketone esters, and natural and synthetic molecules to target metabolic processes. His research also explores the use of these therapies for a broad range of disorders linked pathophysiologically to metabolic dysregulation, including seizures, neurodegenerative diseases, genetic diseases, and cancer. D'Agostino's laboratory uses in vivo and in vitro techniques to understand the physiological, cellular, and molecular mechanism of metabolic therapies. His research is supported by the Office of Naval Research, Department of Defense, private organizations, and foundations. So very impressive bio. So excited to have you here, Dom. So welcome to Cellular Healing TV.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that is it's very impressive work you've done, Dominic. And I found your work, of course. You know, I read a lot of the studies, and I love tracking down the person at the heart of them. So first of all, thank you for your work, because it is changing lives. It's making a difference. I watched the keto diet and keto adaptation change many lives in your area of neurodegenerative work, neurodegenerative diseases. I tell you, that's where I just see it flourish. And we have doctors around the country that are trained in keto adaptation, ketogenic diets, and they thank you, believe me. So
I thank you for implementing it and building a team of people who understand this, and most importantly, connecting with the patients and really, disseminating this information is really the most important thing, because I could spend all my life in the lab, but if it's not being implemented and information is not getting out there, then there's no use.
Yeah, we appreciate that. One of the questions we had right away when we sat down is, because how did he get into this, right? I mean, your background, I mean, how does someone get into studying ketosis? So I'm sure our audience is thinking the same.
Okay. Well, I'll take a step back. In my undergraduate, I studied nutrition and biological sciences with the intention to go to medical school. And also kind of with that in mind, I wanted to do some research in a lab, and I chose to work under the research dean of Rutgers University. And she was doing some fascinating work on the neural control of autonomic regulation. So how our brain responds to low levels of oxygen and adjusts cardiovascular and respiratory output as a function of oxygen, And studying, it gave me the opportunity to study neuroscience, but also studying the physiology through which our brain controls. So, how our brain controls our respiration. So that gave me a pretty good foundation in sort of medicine and understanding some things. And I had the background in nutrition already. And then my postdoctoral work was actually working with the Office of Navy Research and working on the other end of the spectrum, which is not low oxygen, but what happens when you're exposed to high pressures of oxygen in the context of using a oxygen rebreather, which is really specific to Navy SEALs and the special operations community. Because when you're using a rebreather underwater, the advantage is that there's no bubbles. So there's a stealth component to using this technology. But one of the drawbacks is that you're breathing 100% like pure oxygen in a closed circuit rebreather. And a major drawback, a disadvantage is that you have the potential for seizures.
Right.
If you need to go deep, if you're taking on fire, you want to evade the enemy, you go deep with this instrument, this equipment. Breathing high oxygen is a stimulant to the brain. And in that way, it can be used sort of therapeutically for different disorders with hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which is about 2.5 atmospheres max. But if you go down farther than that, in terms of atmospheres of pressure, then the overproduction of oxygen-free radicals disrupts brain energy metabolism in a way that triggers a seizure. And a seizure underwater could be fatal, and it's going to end the mission for sure. And it's if we could lift this limitation, then we could make the physiology of extreme environments much more safer, and we can increase the capability of the warfighter. And understanding this could also enhance and increase the capability of hyperbaric oxygen therapy, because the protocols that are used now, and hyperbaric oxygen therapy can be used. There's 15 FDA approved applications that your insurance will cover it, and then there's a lot of off kind of label applications of hyperbaric. But the limitation of the pressure is CNS oxygen toxicity.
So is that where ketosis comes in? I mean,
yeah,
they can tolerate more. Explain that.
Yeah, so that's what I'm going towards. So oxygen toxicity is a tonic-clonic seizure of CNS, and the military has spent a lot of time and effort looking at things like antioxidants and anticonvulsant drugs. But to get the efficacy of an anticonvulsant drug, it needs to be used in a dosage that's essentially sedating. And you don't want to sedate a Navy SEAL and send him off to a mission where he's got to die, right? So in the process of looking at the cellular and molecular mechanism with all the tools we have in the lab, I realized that this is the breakdown in brain energy metabolism was really what was leading to the seizures. And I just kind of stumbled upon the ketogenic diet because I was searching what do people do when drugs fail for seizures. And I saw that the standard of care for drug refractory epilepsy, drug-resistant epilepsy, was the ketogenic diet. There's also, vagal nerve stimulation, but the ketogenic diet had a remarkably good track record. And when I pulled all the literature and I spent a few weeks reading it, I was really blown away. I was like, this is a grossly underutilized metabolic therapy that had tremendous implications.
How many years ago was that you started researching it?
I discovered it like in 2008, I believe, and I actually knew some people around me. One of them is Mike Dancer. Actually, he was in Europe at the time and connected with me. And I recommended that he try it because he was going to have brain surgery for temporal lobe epilepsy. And it literally almost like cured his epilepsy. It stopped, he went from being homebound to having, his life back again. And I just was reading, one paper and one report after another. And I contacted the program officer in 2009, I believe. And within a year or two after that, I was able to, write up a proposal and dig up enough information and kind of get all the logistics in place to run an actual study in the lab. So about 2010, I was really full force in the lab, running seizure studies, looking at the mechanisms of oxygen toxicity. So the program officer at the time was not really interested in the ketogenic diet because this using a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet. The low-carb diet, I could kind of get them on board with that, but when you talk about a high-fat ketogenic diet, there was a little bit of pushback, and it was just like, well, can we achieve the same elevation of ketones? The ketones seem to be playing a neuroprotective role. Can we do that? Can we circumvent the diet and develop a ketogenic diet in a pill? So in parallel to our ketogenic diet research, I was also working on developing various forms of exogenous ketone supplements.
Taking ketones.
Yes, and esters and ketone salts. And we would develop these things and then test them individually to find out which ones were most potent and which ones had the greatest potential for therapeutic efficacy. And there were a few particular ketone esters that had the most anti-seizure, anti-convulsant effect relative to some other things that we were trying. And they are the substances that we've been focusing on and advancing their kind of use, as far as safety, toxicology, pharmacology. We're doing all this work for the FDA and tracking them as a medical food for very specific neurological disorders, but also for the special operations community, where they have like first choice or first dibs, if you will, of the highest potency ketone products. And then these are more synthetically based or synthesized ketone products. And then there's naturally derived ketone products like ketone salts, like a mineral salt. Sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and even various amino acids can be bound to ketones, namely beta-hydroxybutyrate. Mm-hmm. And these can be developed in a way that's somewhat palatable and formulated with powdered medium chain triglycerides. Right. So we're testing these things individually, and now we're in the process of formulating them together to get a balanced electrolyte, and amino acid formulas. And you got to do that. What looks good on paper does not always pan out in the person's stomach. So sometimes, or their palate. So you got to formulate it in a way that tastes good and formulate it in a way that's tolerable to your GI. And
we have a lot of questions about exogenous ketones, meaning ketones you take as opposed to going into ketosis. So before we even get there, because that is some of the questions that we had, and we had a lot of people write in about the exogenous ketones, probably knowing that your name was connected to studying some of these. I think it's interesting that you work with these. I mean, right now I don't even know if we can say where you are. Can we say where you are right now?
I'm in special operations, community.
Right. Special operations.
Yeah.
We'll leave it
at a base right now. Yeah. So yesterday I couldn't connect because I was, the signal would be scrambled.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're working with all these special ops, right? I mean, it's whether it was the SEALs, the Rangers. I mean, that's really an amazing interest because they're obviously seeing the benefits of ketosis. Now, Dominic, you saw the benefits of ketosis beyond even seizures and neurodegenerative conditions, as we did in our world, dealing with people with unexplainable illnesses and realizing that, wow, I mean, ketones have a major effect on so many different conditions. Why is that? Why is ketosis such a powerful tool?
Mm-hmm. I think there's numerous reasons for that. We know from, a decade or I'll say a century of basically almost a century of using the ketogenic diet for drug refractory epilepsy. And the etiology of epilepsy is largely unknown for the most part for most forms of epilepsy. But what we do know is that there's aberrant neuronal activity. And you could say, that, impaired brain energy metabolism is really pathophysiologically linked to pretty much all neurodegenerative or neurological diseases, right?
Yeah.
So the data was pretty clear that when a person gets on a ketogenic diet, it numerous pathways, I would say there's 20 off the top of my head really, that are kind of brought back into homeostasis. So if your GABA level is low and your glutamate is high, if you have excess reactive oxygen species, if your certain brain energy metabolites like alpha ketoglutarate, succinate, malate are low, the ketogenic diet is what we call anaplerotic. It actually feeds into the Krebs cycle and elevates these Krebs cycle intermediates. Alpha ketoglutarate is actually a precursor for glutamate. And glutamate is actually converted into GABA, and GABA is an inhibitory sort of neurotransmitter. It maintains, neurological homeostasis. So the ketogenic diet does some key things. It converts more of a neurotoxic substance or signaling substance, glutamate, which can be neurotoxic at high levels, and it shuttles the excess glutamate to GABA, which kind of makes us feel calm.
Yeah, glutamate, just for the watchers, is the most excitatory neurotransmitter, whereas GABA is the most inhibitory. Am I right on that?
Yes.
No. So, and just for the people watching, because we have doctors and public watching, look, what you're saying is basically it brings balance to brain chemicals. It brings balance to energy, and how, the matter of fact, it improves cellular energy, which has an effect on all these processes, how your brain works, how your metabolism works.
Yeah.
So that's what you're saying. So it brings homeostasis, balance to basically every process in the body that can drive inflammation, which obviously causes a lot of diseases.
Yeah.
So it down regulates inflammation and brings balance to these chemicals. Is that simply?
Yeah. That's perfect. That's much better put. Yeah, you hit on a couple good topics. So by restoring brain energy metabolism and these intermediates, it also feeds into the production of neurotransmitters,
Right.
which also is put back into balance, and neuroinflammation too. So we looked at a variety of neuroinflammatory or just systemic inflammatory pathways, and many of these are suppressed by nutritional ketosis, specifically by beta hydroxybutyrate. We have a Nature Medicine paper showing that
just so people listening, beta hydroxybutyrate is the most abundant ketone that's formed. So when we break fat down, we make ketones, and beta hydroxybutyrate is one of these ketones that we make that we know makes the brain work better, turns off genes, etc.
Yeah, that's right. And when I got into this in 2010, the signaling properties of metabolites, specifically ketones, were not even discussed, really. I mean, we just understood ketones as an energy metabolite, something that could more or less replace glucose as a brain energy fuel. And now you have, a science paper showing that it functions as on gene expression. So there's, it regulates through epigenetic regulation. It can enhance our antioxidant capacity. It can have a profound effect at decreasing inflammatory pathways that are chronically overexpressed in age-related diseases and even many cancers. So we're looking at, a dozen or more different signaling pathways that ketones are working through, and not just, it's much more than just a metabolite. And so our research is going in that direction, and we're also using what's called metabolomics. So we'll collect blood and we'll collect tissues from animals that are on a ketogenic diet, but also on ketone supplementation. And we can look at all the metabolic pathways by looking at the metabolites. And we have a firm understanding specifically of kind of what's being altered, what precursors are being generated from being in nutritional ketosis. And that gives us greater insight into, the benefits of ketosis. And of course, there's a lot of pharmaceutical companies interested in this data, because if they can identify specific things that are being regulated by the ketogenic diet, then they can make a druggable target. And I can just tell you that the big pharmaceutical companies have contacted me, and they want to know. I mean, they're not even shy about it. They're like, how can we create, what are druggable targets of the ketogenic diet? Like, can you come to our institution, our facility, and give a talk, and, and just on all the different pathways that we can create drugs for, because we realize that this has tremendous therapeutic potential. So how can we make this into a drug? And it's going to be hard, because there's a dozen or 20 or more different major pathways that are being altered kind of synergistically with nutritional ketosis.
I mean, Dominic, when we look at, cultures in history, right? I mean, all of them utilize ketosis at different parts of the year. The Hunzu people, I mean, we can go down the history. Ketosis is something the body's naturally goes through. And I don't even, I just want people to understand listening, because people listening have different things, energy problems, conditions, weight loss issues, hormone issues. Dom, what you said is so key. It's like ketones go up. Okay, they stabilize glucose and insulin, which is, how many diseases right there does that affect, including anti-aging, right? So that's a benefit, but it turns off bad genes. People that are watching this, a lot of things that your genes are expressing is why you don't feel well, and you've made dietary changes, you've made a lot of things in your life. However, these genes are still turned on. So what you're saying is ketones go in and turn off those switches, literally change what our genes are expressing. And Dominic, that happened to me. When I was in ketosis, several times, I know, like, I had certain chemical sensitivities, genes were turned on, certain pathways. I felt them, I watched them downregulate, and I know it was the ketones just turning off those switches. So that's amazing research.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's no limit to. I get emails every day. There's one NIH investigator contacted me and had, a rare genetic disease, and the only thing that worked for her was the ketogenic diet, and she's like a drug researcher, and was like, I want to steer the ship of my lab in this direction and start studying the ketogenic diet because it worked for me. Another person, and more or less an Ivy League institution, had Graves' disease, a big researcher, and contacted me and said ketosis was the only thing that worked for her. Yeah. So we have studies going on now with things like glucose transporter type 1 deficiency syndrome. And this is a fairly rare genetic disorder where you have a persistent molecular pathology that's largely silenced when one is kept in nutritional ketosis. So this disorder, glucose transporter deficiency, prevents the brain from getting glucose by a deficiency in the GLUT1 transporter. And when these kids and adults that have this disorder are maintained in nutritional ketosis, it provides an alternative energy source of energy to the brain. And it's the most powerful way to stop their seizures and treat the motor function deficiencies that is associated. It is the standard of care. So that's where ketone supplements kind of come in, is that to maintain these kids, if the kids are out of ketosis, the symptoms are severe and they're, in a wheelchair. And if they're, they get into strong ketosis, they're like a different person. So we're working on, some of these pathologies that are highly responsive to nutritional ketosis. And one that just kind of popped up is Angelman syndrome. And the leading investigator of this is Ed Weber at our University of South Florida. And, the Angelman syndrome community has, contacted us and him and said, when we put our kids on the ketogenic diet, it works better than any drug that's out there. So we did it.
I've heard of it.
What's that?
What is the syndrome?
Oh, the syndrome is primarily, drug-resistant seizures and really bad kind of motor function issues. So coordination is really impaired. It's a genetic disorder where there's a deficiency or an abnormality in what's called the housekeeping gene, and in the brain, and it leads to kind of a host of neurological and physiological symptoms. And as far as I know, I think the ketogenic diet from the literature has been the most potent therapy for this. So that's one of we did a mouse study where we looked at drugs and we looked at the diet, actually supplements, ketone supplements, and it had a remarkable effect. So the foundation is actually more interested in putting funds towards developing ketone therapy instead of a drug therapy for this disorder. So we're working really close with them, and that's going to be like one of because it's a rare disorder, it's more likely that we can get approval for using ketones for this, and that may set the stage for a lot of other pathologies. So in addition to the special operations community where we want to use it for protecting, neuroprotection under extreme environments, and also enhancing cognitive and physical performance. There's that sort of research, but we're also, I think it's really great to be able to leverage the research that we did for the military and to use that same research as a foundation for these rare neurological diseases, and even Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and ALS are things.
It makes the brain work better, heal faster, and you said something, the special ops using it for athletic performance. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
That was the original application of ketone esters.
Yeah.
And the work that was funded by DARPA, and this goes back more than 10 years, about 15 years. That was one of the original applications, was physical performance. And it has proven to enhance physical performance, above and beyond what was expected, even in elite level athletes.
Well, I said before we got on the show that every summer I go into ketosis because, as a cyclist, I become bonk proof. I mean, literally, endless energy. My body gets so efficient at utilizing fat for energy, in ketones. for energy that I can go without eating and without losing energy. Really is the important part of that.
And that's cycling and running too, or mostly cycling?
I'm not a runner. I mean, you know,
I don't run either.
I actually hate running. I'm actually, you know, genetically really gifted at it. Just do not like it, but I love cycling. But yeah, I mean, it's my performance just goes up. And I had said to you also that Professor Stephen Finney, Dr. Finney, came to Park City where I live, and he lectured to a group of endurance athletes who are carbotorians. I mean, these people, you know, they're doing the high carbohydrate endurance diet, if you will. And his message, I don't know. I mean, it was received by some, but I could tell there was a lot of resistance with people who are like, couldn't get how you could be high performance, you know, on a keto, high fat diet and still, you know, run long distance and cycle long distance. But, you know, I think we had one question for one of our doctors who sent in. Go ahead and give that, because I don't want to.
Yes, we'll fit this in. And this is from Tammy Stewart. She's an amazing doctor, practitioner. So we've heard it before, but why would some people not lose weight in ketosis? And she'd like to hear too more reasons on why people have a hard time getting into ketosis.
Mm-hmm. So there's a variety of reasons for that, right? I think someone needs to work with a doctor or a nutritionist that's sort of savvy in the ketogenic diet. And I think it's really important to, before anyone even starts the ketogenic diet, there's certain things that they need to do. Like they need to know that they have support of the people around them. They need to clean their house out of all the different foods that are potentially non-ketogenic. They need to invest in some, you know, readily available technologies that are out there, from a urine ketone strip to a blood meter to maybe even we've been experimenting with the ketone breath analyzer.
Yeah, we've been experimenting with that too.
Okay.
And I think her question, Dominic, is specific for, hey, we're measuring the blood ketones with a particular patient client, and they're saying, hey, I'm under 50, maybe even under 30, maybe even under 20, and they're still not able to see the higher numbers. I think that was what she was focused on.
Oh, not higher ketone numbers.
Yeah, right.
Or, okay.
It's like the patient or something not getting into ketosis, even though they seem to be doing everything perfectly, and they're just not getting the blood reading.
Yeah. So the more you follow the ketogenic diet, the easier it gets, and the more sort of benefits you derive from it. And you're also, it takes a while, the keto adaptation phase that Dr. Stephen Finney may have talked about. One of the processes, not only does it upregulate the transporters for your tissues to use ketone for fuel, but you're also upregulating the ketolytic or ketogenic enzymes in your liver. So by following a ketogenic diet, you're enhancing liver ketogenesis, the process of liver ketogenesis over time, if you're doing it right. And then so you will over time probably be making more ketones. Most people do. I know me, for example, it was really hard in the beginning. It took about at least 3 to 4 months to reliably see like 1 to 2 millimolar on the meter, the blood meter. But now, you know, if I take a day and I kind of get out of ketosis for one reason or another, by middle of the day, the next day, I can be quickly back into ketosis, and that was not the case. So I think over time, there's maybe epigenetic effects that, where you have enhanced mitochondrial biogenesis, enhanced mitochondrial efficiency, an increase in ketone production through enhancing the enzymatic pathways. And also, for people that are using this for weight loss, a lot of people think if they follow a ketogenic diet, I don't need to count calories. I don't need to count macros. So a lot of people, are like, no, I'm not, I communicate a lot with the fitness community where they use, I guess what it's called, if it fits your macros, IIFM. So if it fits your macros is like, you work with a dietitian and they assign you, you had 200 grams of carbs today, 150 grams of protein, and just stick with that, eat whatever food you want, but just stay within that macronutrient range, sort of like a Weight Watchers sort of thing where it's like points. But And there's an app that's popular, you know, if it fits your macros. And that's used by a large population, a large part of the fitness community. When people get on a ketogenic diet, they think that they can throw out, you know, this whole idea of counting calories or anything. They really need to, you know, if you're eating something like macadamia nuts or cashew butter or, you know, I make ketogenic ice cream at night. You know, if I'm really hungry, I can shovel a lot of that down my down my mouth and get a big calorie load, you know, and those excess, whenever you get a calorie surplus, those calories are going to need to be stored. The thing with the ketogenic diet, as it works for most people, is that it inadvertently causes someone to revert back to normal calorie intake.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Fluctuations in insulin and glucose
Right.
will stimulate cravings that will trigger you to binge, and those excess calories are sort of damage. I mean, and they cause pro-inflammatory spikes in your body. But when your appetite is controlled, you know, with nutritional ketosis, you're much less likely to kind of fulfill those cravings. And you kind of just revert back to a healthy way of eating where your appetite is controlled, where you eat to sustain energy and not eat to fulfill some kind of psychological or physiological deficiency.
And that's what we notice when people go into ketosis and their body works correctly. There's certain things that are released when you break fat down that actually go, I'm not hungry, right? So when I go into ketosis, I'm going, gosh, I forget to eat, right? And so, you know, it's not like I always say you can't get on a caloric restriction diet just pushing food away, because eventually you fail on a diet, right? I mean, caloric restriction that way. But when you go into ketosis, when things are working correctly, you automatically eat less. However, some people, like you said, whether it's emotionally, they don't automatically eat less, right? For whatever reason. And therefore, they're still taking in a lot more food than their body actually needs. And then it wouldn't work for weight loss in that case. So we always say, and we discuss this with Safety, is that ketosis or fasting, you know, create restriction. And eventually the body starts to do the right thing. And eventually people go, oh gosh, I'm such an efficient fat burner that they really, then we get all the benefits, it seems. But I know that what you said, now what we had noticed for people who aren't getting into ketosis, we're on 3-4 months and they're still not able to break through. We have broken them out of the diet, went back to a healthy, I would say healthy, higher carbohydrate diet, still considered low in America. And then 3 months later, go back into it, and boom, all of a sudden they go right back into ketosis. Because I think you're right. I think something genetically shifts, you know, and they're able all of a sudden to get back in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first time you try the ketogenic diet, for most people, it's really hard to adapt. And there's a lag time. So your brain goes through what I call glucose withdrawal, right? So if you transition to a ketogenic diet, your brain is like, where is my glucose? And it sends a stress response to your sympathetic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system, your adrenaline gets released, your cortisol goes sky high, and you have a pretty big stress response. And you can, you know, I've seen this in women, especially because I think women's hormonal systems are much more sensitive to deprivation of glucose and carbohydrates, and they kind of get a pretty big stress response. Unless they're like a hardcore athlete where they're sort of bouncing in and out of ketosis anyway from super prolonged exercise, but that's like the level of, like, you know, a triathlete or Ironman fitness athlete. And men too that engage in, you know, even the high carb community that's transitions to a ketogenic diet has a pretty easier job doing that, some of them, because they're kind of bouncing in and out of ketosis. You have this phenomenon of post-exercise ketosis if your glycogen is depleted. But when you take a sedentary person who has really high glucose, insulin, inflammation, and transitioning them completely devoid of carbohydrates, they'll have a lot of issues that they kind of have to go through. And I think that's where exogenous ketones may come into play. But also when they're in nutritional ketosis, you do have, not only is glucose and insulin kind of controlled, but neuropeptide Y, which actually goes up when we fast, is regulated in ways. There's a lot of neurological hormones.
Viewers don't under what neuropeptide Y.
It's actually a neuropeptide that's involved. That's actually released when we fast, and it has. I'm interested in it because it has anticonvulsant effects, and there's certain receptors and pathways in the brain that that are activated by neuropeptide Y, and there's the literature is not really clear on exactly what it does, but from a pharmacology point of view, it tends to hyperpolarize the membrane potential of neurons, and it keeps the brain sort of in a it helps regulate homeostasis in the brain, and it has some interesting effects on appetite regulation too.
Wow.
But I think another thing to acknowledge is that the ketones themselves have a satiating effect and help to control appetite because it helps to boost and maintain brain energy metabolism. If you keep the brain happy by giving it fuel, it's going to say it's not going to have that stress response, and you're not going to get these cravings. You know, if you deprive it of its fuel, it's going to go in a stress response, and you're going to be seeking high, hyper palatable foods in the form of, salty, very, very sugary foods to mitigate the stress response. But if you're feeding the brain ketones, it has a steady fuel supply. And I think some of the, a large part of the glucose withdrawal and issues that people have in transitioning to a ketogenic diet, much of that could be mitigated with ketogenic supplementation. Whether that be, coconut oil would be the simplest, MCT, there's a powdered MCT that I really like, to the more powerful exogenous ketones that are soon to be on the market.
Let's talk about that, right? I mean, let's talk about now exogenous ketones, because we put people, like I said, in ketosis, keto adaptation. Like I said, in a healthy person, it takes 2 or 3 weeks, right? And you're telling us that these people that have trouble breaking through, we have utilized pulling them out of it eventually, moving them back in, and you're saying, hey, it's just time, right? And you're right. I agree with that. We've found that, and we've used our diet variation where we switching people's diets around to break them in later, and it seems to work. But let's talk about these exogenous ketones, because we've got a lot of questions about them, and Meredith, you have them there. First of all, a question that I have, right? Ketones are a byproduct of breaking fat down, and your body makes these ketones to make up the glucose, the energy, right, at the cellular level. So when we put someone in ketosis, we're cutting their carbohydrates down so much that their body has to start burning fat. And it starts utilizing fat more efficiently, and it makes these ketones that the brain can use and the body loves to use. Okay, we get the benefits. You said them. I mean, turning off genes, balancing energy, all these amazing things for the brain and our body. Okay, so if we take ketones, exogenously, we take them, would that shut off fat metabolism eventually? Could it? Are there side effects?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we need to acknowledge that ketones are a calorie-containing food, really. So almost like a fourth macronutrient, really, right? So you have fats, you have carbohydrates, and protein. And I think of ketones as like if you take, long-chain fatty acids and you chop it up you throw it into a wood chipper, right? You get these small molecules, and these are water-soluble fat molecules, I think, of ketone bodies. And then these have the capacity to cross the blood-brain barrier and then, maintain brain energy metabolism, unlike long-chain fatty acids, which are stored in our adipose or consumed in most fat sources. When we consume, if we're in a state of natural ketosis with just strictly the ketogenic diet, and we consume a large bolus of exogenous ketones in the form of like powerful esters or ketone salts, what you will see, so we want to do some respiratory quotient, look at we're using a metabolic cart. We plan to study this phenomenon, but I think you could probably turn down fat metabolism a little bit, but it would be turned down less if you were to consume an equal amount of calories from carbohydrates, absolutely, and protein even. So you can maintain the fat burning process much longer and give your brain a high energy source you may turn down fat metabolism a little bit just because you're putting energy into the system. Whenever you're putting energy into the system, right, any system, you're going to turn off the oxidation of fats to make those ketones. Your body's going to regulate that pretty well. And it does that pretty well with exogenous ketones. So when we take exogenous ketones, our blood ketone levels will get elevated to a point where it causes a very small release of insulin. And that small release of insulin, nowhere near is what you'd get if you drink a sugary drink or even protein. That small amount of insulin will start to turn down hepatic ketogenesis. That's how we actually regulate. So when we're making ketones, our ketone levels get higher with a ketogenic diet, and then we have ketonuria. And then if they get really high, there's a ketone-induced release of insulin, and that will turn down hepatic ketogenesis.
Okay.
So I guess maybe an easier way to describe it, if I'm fasting or if I'm on a ketogenic diet and someone injects insulin into me, that insulin is going to shut off that's going to put me in a kind of a bad situation, because it's going to make me hypoglycemic and also turn down my body's ability to make its own ketones. Although there's a lag time, it'll take like an hour or two. And there was an interesting experiment actually done at Harvard by George Cahill, who was a pioneer in fasting and ketogenic research. And he fasted people for 40 days and adapted their brains to being in ketosis. And there's no way you could reproduce this study nowadays, because it could never pass IRB to completely. And they looked at blood going to the brain and blood coming out. And they found that about 2/3 of the brain energy after about 10 days was being derived from ketones. And in that state of fasting ketosis, he injected them with 20 IUs of insulin, which would be fatal to most people. But the people that were in a fasted condition, they were asymptomatic for hypoglycemia. And they did cognitive function tests, and they even performed well on cognitive function tests. And their blood glucose went down to 1 to 2 millimolar, which would give a seizure and a coma for most people. But because their ketones were elevated, they had extreme metabolic resilience against hypoglycemia. They didn't even feel it. And that's when someone's in nutritional ketosis or someone's using exogenous ketones and they have dips in blood glucose, which causes cravings, it makes you hangry and irritable, it shuts down performance. You're resilient against that. You're kind of bonk proof because your brain is being, using another fuel. But getting back to your question, it can start to turn down fat metabolism a little bit just because you're putting more energy into the system. But at the same time, you're enhancing all the metabolic pathways that allow your body to use ketones for fuel. So you're enhancing mitochondrial biogenesis, you're enhancing mitochondrial efficiency. So you consume ketones, your ketone levels get elevated and then come back down when you burn them up. And if you do that over and over, it's actually enhancing your metabolic pathways in mitochondria to make you a better fat burner and a better ketone utilizer over time.
So you think the best benefit would be when someone's adapting, this 3-week time when they're adapting, that's a better time to take them? Is there
I think so.
When you're in ketosis, let's say you're just full-blown ketosis, is there a benefit to taking them then?
I think there's definitely a benefit in that transition phase.
Yeah.
And if someone's fasting, maybe if someone's choosing to do intermittent fasting and they only eat one time a day, like at night. We
eat 1.5. We don't eat breakfast. We go, we do that daily all the time. So good. Let's finish your point.
Yeah, so maybe doing that and further kind of increasing your ketones throughout the day if you need a boost. Someone could do that. But I think the main application would be transitioning into a ketogenic diet and maintaining, enhancing that compliance. Because I find the biggest issue with people following the ketogenic diet is compliance due to cravings, due to just that transition period. If they can get through that transition period, at about the 3 to 4 to up to 6 week mark, they really start knowing the benefits, especially if they do blood work. They'll see their insulin levels are under control, their inflammation goes down, their glucose is under control. They'll see all these health benefits starting to come up. And if they want to get, for athletes, a performance boost, so you could use it intra-workout, pre-workout, intra-workout. And I just think in general that ketones may be, like I said, it's more than just a metabolic fuel, right? It's affecting gene expression. So if someone was consuming them, you could expect that you'll be activating pathways that are anti-inflammatory. You'll be activating pathways that epigenetically, regulate endogenous antioxidant pathways, that, longevity pathways even. So these are becoming a focus of the major labs that are looking at longevity now. There was a paper published in OncoTarget, and I think the title of the paper is Beta Hydroxybutyrate, the longevity metabolite, and it has an elegant kind of experiments were done in C. elegans, the nematode worm, where the original calorie restriction was kind of done using this model. And in that model, you get an extension of life about 25% if you calorie restrict the worms to C. elegans. You can mimic that same effect independent of calorie restriction simply by feeding beta hydroxybutyrate.
Wow.
You can extend the lifespan. So it mimics many of the effects of calorie restriction. And I know Dr. Seafridge really big on restriction. He's really big on calorie restriction. And I think, I think maybe when we started originally talking, he was thinking that a lot of the benefits being derived from the ketogenic diet were simply due to calorie restriction. We did some studies showing that it's more than just calorie restriction. Yeah. It's the effects of the ketones. But if you are in ketosis and you calorie restrict, you get like a twofer, you get like a double whammy. You get the benefits of calorie restriction and then the benefits of the ketone.
Dominic, one of the problems I always have with caloric restriction is nobody can do it when they're just saying, I'm just not going to eat, right? It's not sustainable. However, when you caloric restrict because you're just not hungry, that's the way. That's when people look at the Okinawa people or these people, these groups that live long and they don't eat much. They're not eating because they're going, I'm just gluttonous, I'm going to push it away. They eat less because they're not hungry, because they're efficient fat burners. They're efficient utilizing ketones and fat. And really, that's what I want people to understand is that's the state where you're increasing your life. You're eating less, you're caloric restricting. We caloric restrict every day, but I'm not hungry, so, and that's because we're so efficient at fat burning. And, obviously it takes time to get there, utilizing these strategies that we're talking about. So exogenous ketones you feel are most useful, in that transition. Absolutely. I could see that, right? Where people are going to fail. So once somebody adapts, is there still a benefit to taking it? And I also want you to say, how often should people take it? I mean, how much in a day? And also, which ones do you like? So there's 3 questions.
Mm-hmm.
And long-term risks, too. Wondering about that, too.
Long-term risks. Okay. Okay, that's a lot of questions. So
I'm sorry, man. I'm so excited about this.
I know.
I'm coming out of my skin because I'm thinking, gosh, if I don't get these questions answered, I failed.
Yeah.
My viewers.
Well, as you know, I'm a big fan of the ketogenic diet. So I follow the ketogenic diet too. And I just like eating that way. Like I like the foods that are part of a ketogenic diet. And I would more or less call it like a modified Atkins or modified ketogenic diet, because instead of 90% fat, I'm probably getting about 60 to 75% fat.
That's what I do as well.
Yeah. Okay, and that would fall under, that's away from the clinically used ketogenic diet, and that falls in the camp of the modified Atkins or modified ketogenic diet. And from a clinical perspective, that's being advanced by Dr. Eric Kosoff at Johns Hopkins, has sort of been using that diet very successfully for seizures and whatnot. And it's written some elegant reviews on that, showing the literature, showing that you don't have to be this strict. You don't have to necessarily be on a 90% fat diet. That was the original Johns Hopkins protocol. Yeah. He's having very good success with the modified Atkins. So I think that's really what athletes will benefit more from, because it's higher in protein. And we know we do need protein for rebuilding, after workouts to maintain lean body mass. So, in the context of that diet, your ketones are going to be a little bit lower, than the standard ketogenic diet. So instead of 3 or 4, you're going to be hitting 1 or 2. But you could bump it up from a clinical scenario. You could bump it up to 3 or 4 millimolar. I personally feel best like between 1 and 2 millimolar. And if I take exogenous ketones and I start getting up above 3 to 4 to 5, I just I start to feel a little loopy. Like I get like a ketone euphoria or something. Especially if I'm sitting at my desk,
No, no, I have to say that's true, but I only got it when I took the exogenous ketones. So
Yeah.
I was probably around 1 or 2 because I intermittent fast daily. So I'll get high ketones even when I'm not in ketosis towards the afternoon, right?
Yeah.
And I took some exogenous ketones and I said, gosh, I almost felt a little loopy, just like you said.
Yeah.
I felt something. That's what I felt. I didn't realize. I didn't test my ketones at that point. It's happened twice to me. So that's what it was.
And it could range from, even if I take MCT, like a lot of it, I start to get like a little bit anxious. Sometimes like it's sending so much energy to my brain.
I guess that's
especially if I'm in like a kind of a well-fed or kind of a well-rested situation. But sometimes if I'm traveling overseas and missing a couple nights of sleep and sleep deprived, the ketone supplements really help in the context of that situation. Like I was talking, with the special ops community, and they're really big on using modafinil or Provigil, which is kind of like a stimulant, or amphetamine, dexamphetamine. But the ketones actually are a natural way that they think, they can preserve their cognitive and physical performance under conditions of, missing a few nights of sleep. They do their operations at nighttime, so a lot of the guys are sleep deprived. So I think in the context of sleep deprivation and stress, ketones can really shine, and I use them more sort of in that scenario. But I don't really, besides MCT, I'll put MCT in my coffee. MCT powder I use. Quest Nutrition makes a really good one. Actually help test that product, and I like it a lot. But I will use ketone supplementation. I tend to eat a relatively small breakfast, high protein, ketogenic, high fat breakfast, and I don't eat for 12 hours. Yeah.
What would that be, your breakfast? Just so people are curious.
Yeah, so it'll vary. Like, so I went a couple weeks just doing 1 meal per day. And I started, losing weight about 1 pound per week, and I just can't maintain, my size and my strength. And I don't desire to be like really big, but my weight is about 100 kilograms. So I like to I feel that's a good weight for me for my height. And it starts to drop below that if I start to do the one meal a day intermittent fasting. So in the morning,
I do 1.5 to 2, and it's my sweet spot. I get about 18 hours, maybe, I'm saying, of fasting, maybe 19.
Yeah.
That's my sweet spot. So yeah, you have to find your sweet spot.
Yeah, that's what I find too. So yesterday I'm traveling. So actually the hotel had breakfast, but and I could have ate here, but I had sardines packed in olive oil, and I had oysters packed in olive oil, and I have little bags of spinach that I brought. So I just put that in a thing and ate that, and I had to wake up real early for a meeting. So I just downed that, and and that was my meal. And then in the evening, I'll have a fish salad with avocado, and actually get avocado oil, and I'll put a mixture of like olive, avocado oil, and MCT oil in a salad dressing, and use that. And usually some kind of protein, beef, chicken, fish, a lot of fish. I used to eat a lot more beef and chicken in the past, but now about 50% of my dinner would be some type of fish, usually with a green vegetable, and that could be asparagus. I love asparagus. Broccoli, cauliflower, mashed potatoes is probably a big staple of mine, because you make the mashed potatoes and you can add a lot of butter to it, and even like a little bit of MCT. And that becomes like a really, or coconut oil, and that becomes a pretty good, staple of mine. So it varies, but I generally keep the ketogenic ratios even if I'm at home or if I'm traveling. And I found ways people use the excuse of, well, I can't do the diet just because I'm travel too much.
As much as we travel.
Yeah.
Not at all.
It makes it easier, actually. I think it makes it a lot easier because you know what you're going to eat.
What do you like about the powdered MCT versus the liquid? We asked because maybe we should carry it here. We have
a nice liquid, but yeah.
Yeah, I like the liquid too. The thing, if I just take the liquid on an empty stomach, my tolerability is about...
Me too.
Yeah.
1.5 tablespoons, maybe 2 tablespoons on an empty stomach. If I add it to food, it's a little bit better. So about a year or so ago, I was kind of working with Quest Nutrition, just kind of as a just helping them because I want them to develop a ketogenic meal line. And they were developing a medium chain triglyceride, and they spray coat the triglyceride with a probiotic soluble fiber. And its Quest, MCT oil powder is out there. And I tested it and realized that it allows a person to take more MCT. I think I could tolerate up to 12 to 15 scoops per day.
Wow.
And I could literally keep my ketones at about 1.5 to 2 millimolar per day above what I normally do, because the powder, when you ingest it, the soluble fiber tends to slow gastric absorption a little bit. So a lot of the issues people have with MCTs is that it just kind of goes through you so fast. But when it's spray dried with the soluble powder, then and there will probably be other versions of powdered MCTs coming out that are, formulated in different ways. But I find that, I don't have the GI issues, especially on an empty stomach. And since I can tolerate more, I can get my ketone levels up.
Yeah, and that's the problem I have. If I do even 2 tablespoons, I'm bloated out and run into the can,
Yeah. So for traveling too, it's much easier to travel with a powder than with a liquid, right? So if I'm traveling overseas, I can just take a little Ziploc bag and pour in, some scoops of MCTs and bring it with me, and it's not looked at suspiciously, when you go through security. So it's a practical, and it tastes really good. So if you just add it to coffee, it tastes like coffee creamer. So I find this to be really versatile, and I think most.
Okay, got it.
So I kind of helped, beta test this, and then I was at Nutrition Smart, and I saw it's already on the shelf already. You can get powdered coconut oil and powdered MCT oil.
Powdered?
And there's absolutely no artificial sweeteners or fillers or anything in there. I think they use a little bit of calcium caseinate just to coat it, but it's like no protein amount. And they use a soluble fiber to spray coat it. And it's really tasty and palatable. So that's kind of my choice. There's another product on the market, Ketogenic. It's made by Keto Sports, and it's a sodium and potassium beta hydroxybutyrate powder. And one could just combine, the MCT powder with the beta hydroxybutyrate salt together. And this is kind of what I do in the afternoon. I'll eat and if I need an extra kick, I'll do a scoop of each.
Okay, so you do that in the afternoon? A lot.
I do, not all the time, but
right.
But I do, especially if I'm at my desk and have long days ahead of me, like midday, I'll boost my ketones. I'm usually sitting at about 1.2 to 1.5 millimolar in the day, and if I take a little bit of that, it shoots me up to 2.5 and up to 3, and I feel like I can really hammer out and really focus on some work.
She had for you, which your favorite exogenous ketone? I actually, she just sent me, had someone send me that the one you just mentioned.
Sample of the Ketogenic.
Yeah.
Which is the salt, you said, just to clarify for our viewers.
It is what?
It's a ketone salt?
Yes, it's beta hydroxybutyrate with sodium and potassium, or sodium and calcium.
Is that the one you like?
I like it. Yeah, there's a lot of
pretty good. There's a few multi-level ones, which
there's some other ones, and they kind of claim to use sort of the product that we use in the lab, and they are, to their credit, they are using sort of a formula. The formula that we tested in the lab was MCT combined with beta hydroxybutyrate salts, and that combination gives a better pharmacokinetic profile. It's better tolerated, and we see kind of enhanced therapeutic effects when that combination of the MCTs and beta hydroxybutyrate are used together. So you have, Prove It is out there. They sell a product, Keto OS, which is pretty good. I like that product. And the Ketogenic products. There's also a company out there. It's probably the stuff I've been testing recently, and I really like it. It's called Epigenetics. And Epigenetics is new. I think they kind of stay a little bit low profile, but it's a quad salt, which means there's sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, beta hydroxybutyrate, combined with a powdered MCT product. Right. And I have some bags around here somewhere in my suitcase, but I've been testing that. And what I do during the day, when I'm fasted up to about 2 in the afternoon, I'll check my ketones and I'll take the product. And I've been testing different. I usually test a product 5 times, so I'll get 5 curves of my glucose and ketones over time. And I really like the Ketegenics products. It's a little bit maybe watered down, so it could be, I think they're going to make a product that's more geared toward the medical community, but the Ketegenics MCT ketone salt product is one that I've been testing, and I really like it. It's on the market now.
Ketogenic you like Ketegenics you like, and
the Prove It product's pretty good too. I like that.
Yeah, the Prove It. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've seen with some of the advertising, I don't know if it's Prove It or one of them, but you know, it's almost like they're saying, hey, this will put you in ketosis faster. Well, not really. It just puts ketones in your blood. That doesn't mean you're in ketosis. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that the marketing is definitely over the top, and it's not something that I approve of. I actually, I'm not associated with any of these companies. I don't have ownership, or I'm not a spokesperson for any of these products. But what we do, like our university will create some intellectual property behind specific types of ketones and their combinations, and some of the companies have gotten licensed for that with the stipulation is that they have to use this specific kind of ketone in this specific combination, because if they're using things outside of, if they're using a different kind of ketone salt or a different formula, then they're not going to be getting the beneficial effects of the ketones that we see, because we spend a lot of time and effort identifying what ketones would be most therapeutic and most efficacious. So, and that a lot of that time and effort was a lot of money to really nail down the ideal formulas. And I think that these guys, coming out with products, I think it's in no way will they be anywhere as near as potent as the ketone esters. So the esters will be incredibly ketogenic, and they will be in the realm of the special operations community and also as medical foods. And I'm working with a company that they think they might be able to bring this to market to the general population too. Wow. So it'll be like sort of like these products times 2 eventually in the market, but they don't taste good. So the more potent a ketone product is, there's like the palatability is like inversely proportional to the potency, right? So the more potent these ketone esters are, the more unpalatable they become. So we're working on the palatability issue, and I think that'll be solved within 6 months, and there'll be a product on the market that's very potent.
Yeah, I'd be interested in talking to you about doing just a physician line of this, keto ester products, just a physician line, not over-the-counter prescription, but a physician line of products. Like we carry mostly physician line supplementation that can only be bought through physicians, and maybe that's a way to go with that product.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of the safety studies right now, and the idea is within the near future, to get generally recognized as safe, is what's called GRAS. Get GRAS approval for the product, and all the data is there. And we've done chronic, 15-week, very high dose feeding studies where we look at liver function, kidney function, every possible, biomarker, and we know that this is safe. So it's putting this together as a package and just showing it to the FDA that these break down to bioidentical ketone molecules when they're ingested. So you break the ester bond with intracellular esterases, and it liberates the ketone. And whatever it's esterified to, we use usually something found in nature, can go to the liver, and that also gets broken down into energy metabolites and even ketones. So that's what we've been putting together, different types of esters. And I think the main application right now, though, is for these genetic disorders in the special ops community. But I think a sort of less potent or sort of mid-range, somewhere between the ketone salt products and somewhere between sort of the special ops community product, somewhere in the middle, that it won't be like, dangerously potent, but it'll be something that would really be of interest to elite level athletes, I think, and also for like a physician, what you mentioned, a physician-based medical line, I think would be important.
Right.
So.
Yeah, so I think you motivated me to when I'm in ketosis, just use some exogenous ketones as that boost, kind of like you do, right? Lacking sleep or, don't have time, just use it as a boost. Otherwise, my body's producing it by itself through the breakdown of fat, which is important. I think I'm going to start utilizing it more as we've been experimenting with it in these people that are trying to break in to ketosis.
Yeah.
I was worried that it might slow it down, that they may not keto adapt if they're taking exogenous ketones. And you're saying that that's not the case, that it would help with the symptoms, but not stop them from breaking into ketosis. That's true?
Yeah. I think it can mitigate the symptoms and also maybe stimulate those ketolytic pathways. So stimulate the metabolic pathways that are important for using ketones for fuel, for shuttling ketones. Because if the ketones are there in the system, like the body will actually upregulate the transporters for that. And if you have people, patients that are type 2 diabetic, what we find, we have a paper under review now, I think it just got accepted, showing that when you give an exogenous ketone, it lowers blood glucose. And we don't actually know how it's working, but I can tell you from someone, we do a lot of metformin studies for our cancer research. And I could say pretty convincingly that exogenous ketones have a much greater effect at lowering blood glucose than a diabetic drug like metformin. So it's really potent. So I think this could be a pretty effective way to manage type 2 diabetes.
Patients. So exciting.
Yeah,
that's a big population of people.
They have trouble fasting, right? I mean, more so than the average person. Utilizing ketones would make even a fast, which has all types of different benefits, even than ketosis. You can utilize that. Seyfried always says glucose down, ketones up, glucose down.
Yeah.
How that happens, obviously the body, regulates, they work opposite. So I can see this being utilized. We love fasting people, intermittently, long 4-day fast, 10-day fast, whether it's beef stock, whey water, or just water. And, this could really make a diabetic break into fasting a lot easier if they just have that little bit of fuel.
Yeah, that's great that you do that, because I think not only are you deriving a lot of physiological benefits or, by enhancing metabolic physiology with a fast, but you're also training the patient to not be psychologically dependent upon food.
Yeah.
And I think that, I've talked to a lot of people who fast, and some of them had what I would call like a preoccupation with food, and just, they're obsessed with eating and by doing intermittent fasting or just, occasionally doing fast, they feel like it puts them in control of the food. Initially, they might get some like crazy cravings, but after they do it for a while, they feel like they have so much more psychological kind of control over their appetite. Their appetite becomes regulated because their metabolic physiology improves. And it has a double effect by improving sort of their overall psychology behind food itself,
Dr. Dom, you should see the benefits. We teach people to even do a 4-day fast once a month, every other month. And every fast, we see a different level of healing, because what happens. I mean, I don't even think we understand from a scientific point of these amazing things that transform metabolically, throughout the body. I mean, at the cellular level, every fast heals. And periodic fasting just reconditions the body. Like I said, that's how you get them eventually becoming efficient at utilizing fat and ketones. And, remarkable things happen during fasts.
Yeah, I think, that's definitely the case with almost everybody, but I think you got to gauge the fast a little different. I'm sure there's an art and science to how you do this. When it comes to some of the patients that contact me, some of them are cancer patients that have gone through chemo, the standard of care, it failed, and they want to know what options. And some of them, if they are sort of have a healthy or a high BMI, they are ideal candidates for a fast. They've been told to drink as much sugar and sugary things as possible. Occasionally you get the patient that has chemotherapy is incredibly catabolic and contributes to cachexia. So sometimes you get patients that are kind of wasted and they really need to build themselves up. And sometimes fasting is not sort of the best situation for them, but a ketogenic diet that's well formulated could, actually add muscle if they do some strength training on top of that. We completed a study, it's under review, hopefully published soon, that in elite level sort of advanced athletes, showing that you can actually add lean body mass over an 8-week study with a ketogenic diet. So you can lay down new muscle on a ketogenic diet.
When I go into ketosis, I actually gain muscle because I spare my muscle, honestly. My body just kind of eats muscle too easy, and especially if I'm doing endurance sports. But when I'm in ketosis, I spare my muscle when I'm doing endurance sports, and I actually, can put muscle on. So it really benefits me that way. And that's why we use whey water fasting oftentimes for those people. We use beef stock fasting. So we utilized it. And of course we use ketosis and fasting. So we utilize these things in different tools, but ultimately the restriction, I mean, Seyfried is right. Restriction plays a role, but again, it's not, purposely necessarily caloric restricting diets. We get people to the point where they automatically start eating less. But we do it through a lot of these, temporary restricted moments, whether it is ketosis, whether it is a fast, whether it is daily intermittent fasting. It works. I mean, it's just amazing what happens.
And many people fear losing muscle mass when they get into ketosis, or you would suggest a ketogenic diet, but that's not usually the case.
Not necessarily true.
No. I mean, it's going to, each person, you got to adjust the calories and the level of protein. But no, that's not the case. You can gain muscle. And I'm a big proponent of, resistance training too. So I think if you couple the ketogenic diet, you could further enhance, the muscle building effects with resistance training, obviously.
My son he put on just massive muscle like that when he went into ketosis. And, he definitely, he kept his protein, up, and his caloric intake probably more so than the average person looking to lose weight. But it worked for him. He gained all this muscle and got lean. 17 years old. And he got ripped and lean and put on muscle. It was amazing to watch. Well, we're at the end of our time. I'm telling you, we could probably do 3 hours show. Because this is a topic that we love. I know my daughter.
That's great.
Yeah, exactly. We could go on. My friend, make us a promise you're going to come on again, because
I would love to. Would love to. I'm sure there'll be more questions too, as you know.
You can fire away, but I would love to even have you. Gosh, maybe we should get him an April seminar. Stephen Finney and you, Dominic.
I'd love that.
So we'll see if your schedule's clear. I mean, this would. There's just so much to learn. Look, this is an important tool. Really, that I believe is part of an answer to an epidemic of problems and why people don't feel well. Hormone, neurological conditions, neurodegenerative conditions, fatigue. I mean, everything that people are about, brain fog. I mean, all of these conditions, what we're talking about is part of the answer, and that's why we want to get this message out,
to get it mainstream. Like I'm at a medical college, so our medical school has a few hundred medical students, and I'm giving a lecture on all this in about 3 weeks. And, the enthusiasm from the medical students, they're like, we don't get, first of all, they're not taught any nutrition. No. And then this is like something that's completely foreign to them. But I'll give a little lecture on it or mention it in a lecture, even though, it's not part of what they should be learning, because it's not part of the medical boards. So the school kind of dictates what's on the curriculum based on what's on the boards, because they want the scores to be good. But from the standpoint of the student interest, they have more interest in this than most topics that they're covering. So I get a lot of interest from medical students saying, I want to incorporate this into my practice. Like, we're not even taught this information. It is so important. I mean, it could literally put type 2 diabetic into remission. And we're just taught to, write a prescription and not tell them, to change. They say, how should we lower, a diabetic's blood glucose? Well, with more insulin. That's how you lower a type, a diabetic's glucose. So they're not taught to use food as medicine. And I think that needs to get mainstream. And what we're talking about is really a powerful metabolic therapy. It's not a fad diet. That message needs to get out.
Now, this is a tool that we've seen work for so many different things and just transform so many lives. And really, it's part of our who we are as humans. I mean, every culture that's lived long and healthy, ketosis is a part of it. So, no doubt about it. Well, gosh, so we will have to do a part 2.
Yes, we have to do a
Okay.
part 2.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dom, for
Yes.
your amazing research and what you're doing to get this information out to the public. Any final words?
I just want to thank you guys, like I said, for getting this information out there, because I could spend all my time in the lab, but if it's not for people like you that recognize that this research has tremendous benefits for the end user, the patients, I think I'm just very thankful for that you kind of acknowledge, the research that we're doing. I'm working on a more comprehensive website, but I do have a website where I've compiled information.
Give us that website right now.
Ketonutrition.org. And I'm working on another one, maybe even a podcast and a more extensive blog in the future. That's sort of in the pipeline, something that I'm working on. I would like to get, we could talk offline, a list of the doctors. So I would like to add sort of the doctors that are ketogenic savvy, nutritionists that are keto savvy, I guess, so I can put it on that website as a list of resources for patients to go to.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have doctors trained around the country in this, and you had said, you really have to work, those watching, with someone who is trained, because electrolyte depletion, there's a lot of things that people do wrong.
Absolutely. Yep.
Lose muscle, get sick, rapid heart rate, drop of energy. We see it all, and it's common mistakes that are made. So absolutely, you want to work with a practitioner who understands keto adaptation for sure. And we'll give you that list, Doc, because
great.
We're training doctors around the country that understand these principles of fasting and ketosis and cellular healing and detox. I mean, that's what we do. So, thank you. And ketonutrition.org. We'll absolutely send people there, and we'll give you the practitioners for there. And we're going to do a part 2, Dominic. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Dom. And if you're watching, want to know more about the ketogenic diet, head over to Dr. Pompa's website, drpompa.com. 2 articles on ketosis, one kind of laying out the framework, and then another on troubleshooting. And if you're kind of wondering about Dr. Thomas Seyfried, who we mentioned as well, did an episode with him. It was, I believe, episode number 95 on Dr. Pompa's YouTube channel, and you can check that out as well.
Okay, great.
Awesome.
Thank you. I'll check it out.
Okay, Dom, thank you. Thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you next week. And we're going to be interviewing Robbie Bessner on EMFs, electromagnetic fields, and learning a lot more about that and some of the health issues surrounding those. So tune in next week for episode 99, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
Dr. Dom.